I'm Luke Summerhays, and I love Sandy Shocks. Every now and then on this podcast, I have to contend with a particularly difficult question. What is a Pokémon? We've had everything from a little yellow mouse to a dragon that can fly into space, with ghosts, plants, and sometimes just martial artists who are barely different from human beings. In the earliest games, it was implied that real animals live in the Pokémon world too, and that these were a separate class of mythical creatures, but that has gone out the window since then. Instead, one could say that these are just animals in their world, representing the power of nature in a world where humans are able to live in harmony. This interpretation is confused by Pokémon which are clearly man-made, either in deliberate examples like Porygon, or in the case of human waste being given life like Garbodor or Muck. And then there are some which seem to be literal robots. Magnemite and its evolution Magneton have been around since the first generation, gaining the additional Steel type in the second generation, and the UFO-like evolution Magnezone in the fourth. Here in Paldea, we can meet a Paradox relative of Magneton in the form of Sandy Shocks. An electric/ground Pokémon. Rather than hovering, Sandy Shocks walks on leg-like extended magnets. Iron filings, as one might attach to the end of a magnet in a school science lesson, give the impression of hair and a bushy tail, making this Pokémon an odd mix of mechanical and wild. The Magnemite family have never had a clear comic book origin, like Voltorb or Grimer. In Legends Arceus, Magnemite and Magneton can only be found in time portals, implying a modern origin, yet Magnezone hovers over the land regardless. Combine the flying saucer over Hisui with this example, which joins other Scarlet Paradox Pokémon from the distant past, and we seem to have an ancient alien. Though discredited by mainstream scientists and mainstream historians, so-called ancient astronaut hypotheses are perennially popular with conspiracy theorists and science fiction writers. This is particularly true in Japan, where myths about gods riding ships from the sky and fairy tales about princesses from the moon lend themselves nicely to ancient alien interpretations. What we end up with are seemingly purely fantasy video games, often having a surprise sci-fi twist at the end. Pokémon Scarlet says of Sandy Shocks, "No records exist of this Pokémon being caught. Data is lacking, but the Pokémon's traits match up with a creature shown in an expedition journal." And Pokémon Violet tells us, "It slightly resembles a Magneton that lived for 10,000 years, and was featured in an article in a paranormal magazine." And of course, we can read this magazine. Enigmas of Paldea, file number 7. Sandy Shocks, a Magneton with a 10,000-year lifespan? Some scientists claim that this mysterious being is a Magneton that has lived for 10,000 years. It has been sighted numerous times in Paldea's more arid regions, but there are no reports of it ever having been caught. It is said that Sandy Shocks is an aggressive sort, and that some people who've seen it have been attacked as well. It takes its name from a beast with a matching description in the era-defining Scarlet Book. Sandy Shocks being on Earth for 10,000 years is more in keeping with ancient alien stories than Legends Arceus, which would see Magnezone visiting Earth a mere 1 or 2 centuries before the modern day. Although Pokédex entries discussed Magnezone sending signals to and from space, we've never had firm confirmation that the Pokémon was extraterrestrial in origin. Similarly, at the time of this podcast's writing, with one DLC for Scarlet and Violet out and the second still on its way, we don't know for sure that the Paradox Pokémon have travelled through time, or whether they've come from another dimension, or simply been conjured from the Professor's imagination. Perhaps we'll never know the true answer, but that's okay. We don't know for sure what a Pokémon is, but I do know I love them. Music for Luke Loves Pokémon is composed by Jonathan Cromie. Artwork for the show is by Katie Groves. Writing, producing, and editing is by me, Luke Summerhays, while funding is provided by lovely listeners at patreon.com/podcastiopodcastius. Next up are Iron Treads and Iron Bundle, so if you have thoughts about those or any other monsters, hit me up with a DM or an email to lukelovespkmn@gmail.com. If you like this podcast, please rate and review wherever you're listening, or tell a friend. If you want to hear more Pokemon chatter from me, come by twitch.tv/lukelovespkmn, most Saturday nights from 9 PM UK time. And even if you don't feel like doing any of that, thank you so much just for listening. I love Sandy Shocks. And remember, I love you too.